Welcome now to The Big Story. Well-known political commentator Lloyd B. Smith is urging Jamaican lawmakers to revise the 1843 Towns and Communities Act, which criminalizes using profane, indecent, or obscene language in public spaces. This call to action follows recent incidents involving prominent politicians, including the People's National Party President Mark Golding and Jamaica Labour Party MP Everett Warmington, who used expletives in a public address and subsequently apologized. The 1843 Towns and Communities Act criminalizes using profane, indecent, or obscene language in public spaces. Lloyd B. Smith is urging lawmakers to revise this law considering modern-day reality and Jamaica's cultural context. We want to get more from Lloyd B. this morning, and so he's our guest in the Big Story segment. Good morning, Lloyd B. Smith. How are you today, my brother?
I am very fine, Rich B. Good to be on your program, as usual.
It's always a pleasure to have you on, Lloyd, and not just myself, but from every indication, many of our listeners want to hear what you have to say. I will tell you this, that the last conversation that we had, the views on our YouTube channel have now been bordering on 20,000 in just a couple of weeks. So you are a real star.
I am humbled by that disclosure, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And so all that and more makes us very happy to have you on this morning. Lloyd, what specific revisions are you contemplating in relation to this 1843 Towns and Communities Act?
Well, for starters, it is, for me, a big joke in the sense that the fine for using so-called bad words, as we say in Jamaica, is a mere $1,500. So even from the very outset, that as a law in itself is not a deterrent. There is a sentencing procedure where if you don't pay the 1,500, then you spend some amount of time in prison. But it's very unlikely that anybody who would have been charged would not be able to come up with that paltry fine, you know. So even from that perspective, I think the law needs some revision if it is that there is some intention to use it as a deterrent. At the same time, there is the whole business of freedom of expression. And we have seen over the years where, for example, a number of artists performing on Jamaican stages have been pulled off or prosecuted by the police for using a Jamaican bad word, which we can't repeat some of them here. And again, one questions what, you know, I personally don't think that you can legislate morality. It's more of a moral matter rather than a legal matter. And so, to me, it does make much sense to pursue that route as it becomes quite ridiculous after a while. And, in fact, to some extent, oppressive. In Jamaica, I mean, let's face it, the majority of Jamaicans at some point or the other use a bad word of one kind or another. And we also have to realize that even if we are going to keep the law, then it has to be contextualized. Say, for example, the two incidents that we are looking at right now, the one with Warmington and the other with Golding.
Yes.
In the case of Warmington, he actually outrightly used the F word a few times on a public stage. On the other hand, in the case of Golding, what happened was what one would call a sort of remark. In other words, it wasn't hurled at the audience, but rather it was a sort of, thing that just came out of his mouth through frustration with the microphone not working. Now, one is not saying that one spits out the other, as we normally do in our politics, no better herring, no better barrel. But the fact is that I think, yes, we would have to contextualize. I have seen, for example, over the years where one of the places I find that the most bad words are cursed in Jamaica is in a police station, and it is not being cursed by the by
citizens,
the prisoner or the criminal who has been arrested. If you get my point. So I think we need to come to terms with the reality. And I for one, feel that some of our Jamaican bad words, if you recall, they came out of our early history during colonialism. And like obia, which again I think needs to be decriminalized, quite frankly, although there are some persons who insist that it should stay on the books. But like obia, I do believe that these were vestiges of our colonial past, which we should get rid of. These laws were put there by the British.
Yes.
Who have their own swear words, but I can't recall where their swear words were criminalized.
So in effect, Lloyd, is it that we obviously are agreed that the current law in regulating public language is ineffective, but primarily, are you calling for greater penalty or the fact that persons should be allowed culturally to express themselves using these words in public?
It's a two-edged sword. What I would say is that I would want the matter to be fully heard and debated in Parliament,
okay, to
begin with, and to look at all the various aspects, as I said, because there is what is known as context. So, for example, if I buck my toe, as we say in Jamaican language, if I buck my toe and I utter an expletive, I don't see where that ought to be criminalized. Perhaps on the other hand, the moralists among us may say if I go on a platform or somewhere in the public space and I utter an expletive at the audience, then maybe that could be seen as being, out of order. But again, as we have seen in both cases here, both gentlemen have apologized. Mm-hmm. And from all indications, the apologies, for the most part, were accepted and the matter automatically put to rest. So this is why I'm saying that perhaps what we need more is moral suasion rather than prosecution, because in the final analysis, the prosecuting someone to use a bad word in Jamaica is not going to stop people from using the bad word. Mm-hmm. And even if one is to be prosecuted, these fines are ridiculous. So if it is that the majority in Parliament who are our lawmakers, who should come to the conclusion after a vigorous debate that there are grounds to keep the law, then make it more effective. Mm-hmm. Give it some amount of strength, but otherwise it doesn't serve any purpose.
Now, I want to introduce another aspect to this discussion, Lloyd, and that is whether or not you believe that politicians themselves should be held to a higher standard of language use.
Yes, absolutely. But I have been in the trenches at times. As you well know, there was a time when I was involved in politics.
Yes.
I was in fact a member of Parliament, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you something. Politicians use a lot of bad words. I mean,
if you must say so yourself.
It's par for the course, and politicians ought to set examples. Yes, and this is why I use the words moral suasion, where you upbraid these people when they do these things and you call on them to, because look at the great United States that we tend to copy. The other day, President Trump used the F word.
Mm-hmm. To the media.
Yes. And yes, there was some amount of, objection to it, but there was no thing about his being prosecuted. So I'm saying that moral suasion perhaps is the better way to go, rather than making it a legislative issue, because in real terms, it, to some extent, and perhaps to a large extent, it infringes on one's right to freedom of
speech. Mm-hmm.
Many years ago, there was a student at a graduation. I don't remember if you recall that incident. A student who was giving the valedictorian
yes, I remember.
address, and at the end of his presentation, he said to his fellow student, "Big up on no
yes.
peace himself." You remember that one?
I remember that. And that brings me to my next question, the matter of the social impact that might arise from revising a law like this, especially when it comes to the young members of our society who now might now feel they can use this kind of language talking to any Mr. Man or woman or amongst themselves and their peers. What about the social impact this might have?
Yeah, well, to begin with, it is happening. I have been on the street sometimes, and when I hear students asking, the type of words that I hear coming out of their mouths make me tremble. So it's not a question that they are not already fully involved in that sort of verbal activity. It is ingrained, Richie B, in our culture. And we need to look at the words. How many of these words really are we going to, who is going to be the final arbiter on this? Because to me, one of the most egregious expletive in Jamaica, we have seen it has cost people their lives. People have been injured, killed, house burned down when they say to somebody, "Go do whatever you do to your mother." Mm-hmm. That, to me, is one of the most egregious of all. Mm-hmm. That doesn't fall under any legislative procedure, and that is one of the most common ones used nowadays. If somebody offends you, they mash up on your toe, or whatever it is, you tell them to go do what and what with your mother. Yeah. And that is one that I think maybe that should be looked at, because it is one that, as I said, led to murder and serious injury and so on. Mm-hmm.
Yep. The SYMs are definitely too common and prevalent in our society. But do you know, Lloyd, whether or not other countries have similar laws, and could we look to other countries for guidance on this matter? Do you know of any?
I have not had the opportunity to do enough research, but I suspect that in the Muslim countries, for example, you may have what is called blasphemy, when you say certain, but not necessarily the type of bad words that we use. And there might be some laws there that deal with blasphemy. One recalls a famous author whose book was filled with a number of so-called blasphemous words, and the Muslim world tried and sentenced him outside of his own presence to death. His name slips me at the moment. Mm-hmm. But in general terms, I'm not aware of any such oppressive law as we have in Jamaica. I mean, you will be at some fest over the weekend. Yes. If an artist at some fest goes on the stage and use a bad word, he's likely
Superintendent Samuels.
Yeah. Or taken off the stage by the police. And it may well be argued that we have infringed on his artistic expression.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking while you're speaking, and I want to put another item in the mix. Some people might find this funny, but with pastors possibly, will pastors possibly get a pass on this, or are they going to be allowed also to use colorful language in church? And will crusades have something like a parental advisory warning in the future if we should revise these laws along the lines you're suggesting?
Well, as I said, it's going to boil down to a matter of moral suasion. I don't think we can legislate morality.
Yes.
And as I've said, using a bad word, to me, should not be a criminal offense. It is more of a moral turpitude sort of thing, and should be treated as such. And you know, in the same way as these two gentlemen have apologized for having done so, and that there was no need for them. Well, we have heard that they are going to be prosecuted, and they were not prosecuted, which is another joke, really, because they are lawmakers. And if we were that serious about this issue, then the law should have taken its course.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there again, you have one law for the means and one for the persons.
I don't know. In closing, I'd question aloud whether or not the time might come when we have to have a bleep button at these campaign rallies.
Yes, and elsewhere.
And elsewhere.
It's a tricky issue, but this is why I'm saying that it needs to be elevated to the level of a debate in Parliament. Let all forces contend, let the church be involved, let the education system be involved, and at the end of the day, we come up with a more reasonable, a more rational, and a more modern-day approach to the matter of expressing one's self. Because, as I said, it's a moral question for me, not a criminal one.
Yes.
And I don't know if when you criminalize the use of a word in the very fairness, that makes much sense.
Yes. Lloyd B, thank you so very much. Really enjoyed this conversation this morning. I'll be down in Montego Bay, starting with my first broadcast on Thursday morning at the Harmony Beach Park in Montego Bay from 6 until 9. If you are one of those who head out there to do your morning exercises, then definitely stop by our broadcast point. Until that time, take care, and thanks for your time this morning.
Okay, Richie B, big up yourself.
Every
I won't
time.
use the other word.
No, please don't. Have a good day, Lloyd.
Take care.
You too.